his method for making a pot. He is going to be using Mata Ortiz clay with a method called a tortilla chorizo method, which basically is a flat slab of clay, and then they use coils to coil the pot up. Jerardo is considered a master potter, and what that means is in Mata Ortiz, you're only considered a master potter if you actually find your own clay, process your own clay, make the pot, sand the pot, burnish the pot, paint the pot, fire the pot, and make your own tables for the pot. So he does all of those, you know, so everything about his pottery is handmade. It will take them, when they dig the clay, it'll take about a week's period of time for the drying time of how they process the clay and make it. It's northern central. If you follow the Arizona-New Mexico border, almost straight down 150 miles across the U.S. border. So it's a high mountain desert area, and it's in between the mountain range, those Sierra Madres. But up until they started making pottery, most of them were either ranchers or there's a lot of lumber in the mountains around the area, and so they had a lumber mill there. And so most of them worked for the lumber mill, or there is a Mormon community north of there that grows fruit, and they work for the Mormons. So what he's trying to do is just compress the clay in the bottom of the bowl. And what you want to do if your mold is a little deeper, you don't want to push your finger right in the middle. You want to sort of work your clay down if you can. Otherwise, the bottom is going to be really thin.
How thick is the finished pot?
His finished pots are somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch. Also, the clay in Mata Ortiz, it's very sticky. It's very sticky, and so you'll see they're very clean when they work with their clay. He'll wash his hands a lot because otherwise the clay dries on your fingers, and then as you pinch, you get flakes of dry clay. So they have very basic tools when they work with their clay. This is a saucer from a child's tea set. That they use as a rib. A bunch of different things are used as a rib, but they're usually fairly simple like that. They have molds that are of different sizes. That's called a molde, which is a mold, and they're made out of plaster. The other clay they'll use is a sagueta, which is a hacksaw blade, and they'll use the rough side to rough up the whole pot, because if you pull a blade or a serrated edge over the pot, anywhere where it's low, you won't see the serration, so you know to fill in there. And they'll work the pot until they get it smooth, and then they'll turn it over on the other side and smooth it. Now, when Jerardo puts his tortilla in, he usually makes sure that it's enough that it comes up the sides. Some people will cut it off right at the top of the mold, but I think it's really hard to adhere a coil at that point. He'll try to work the clay almost straight up, because you can always make the pot go out. Bringing it back in if you work with clay is a problem. So when you're bringing your pot up, you want to always be able to see where the clay goes down into the mold. The last class said they gave me a good name for it. Otherwise, you'd get a muffin top, because if you can't see that line where it goes down in, then basically the clay is overlapping it. When you take it out of the mold, it's gonna come up and then go out. So, and you don't really want it to do that. Now for a needle tool, they use a hypodermic needle, which actually works way better than our needle tools. Because it's made of surgical steel, it doesn't have a lot of drag on it, and so it makes a way cleaner cut than a needle tool does. So all their pots are made using this method, you know, whether it's an animal or a pot. And even the miniature pots, you know, that his wife makes that are only about this big, they all have like she has little molds for the bottom.
No grog, is there any grog in the clay?
Their clay, no, it's really fine. Their clay is almost like porcelain. Do you guys know what terra sigillata is?
Yeah.
It's almost like dried terra sig. The way that they process their clay is they'll go into the mountains and dig their clay and then let it dry if it's not dry already. They'll put it into like a big wash tub and, you know, like a 5-gallon bucket and maybe 3 or 4 more 5-gallon buckets of water. They'll fill it with water. So it's a lot of water to clay. And they'll take a shovel or a big stick and mix it up and let it set overnight. And that will break down the clay particles. And the next morning, they'll come out and stir it again, and with like a coffee can, they stir it and let the heavy particles sink to the bottom, and with a coffee can, they'll scoop off the water on the top. Actually, I just want to tell you, as he adds a coil, he overlaps it with the clay that's already there, and he'll seal the whole inside and the outside also.
You put the clay on the coil on the outside, didn't you?
He does, but you know, they'll put them on the inside or the outside depending on which direction they're going and what they feel is easier. But he will overlap his coils. They don't use slip, they don't score, you know, they use wet clay, and typically their pieces are going to be made in one setting. You know, so they very rarely do they cover their pots and come back later and work on them. But then for the processing, so they're going to stir the one bucket, and then they have another bucket that has almost like a mesh that's like a window shear that's folded over. And that liquid will be poured through that window shear. And if it doesn't go through, I mean, it's so suspended, the clay is so suspended in liquid that it just pours right through. And they'll let that set for 24 hours, and the clay will settle, and you'll have water on the top, and they siphon off the water and put it back in the first bucket. And they repeat that process one more time. Then they will try to siphon after, you know, that second bucket has set for 24 hours. They will siphon off as much water as they can, and then they put it into a box that has plaster on the bottom, and they have some sort of like a bedroom, a sheet from a bed folded over in there, and they pour all the clay in there, and they just wait until it dries out, and then they use it pretty much immediately. They have clays of all colors. You know, in an area this big, you could find 8 to 10 different colors of clay. And the clays they process the clay basically the same way. Different people do process their clay differently, though. You know, some people make bigger pots and they'll leave a little bit more of the sand in it. They won't let it settle as much before they scoop it out. You know, Jerardo likes really fine clay. The clay actually allows them to be able to sand the pot after it's dry and then to burnish it, which with a lot of clay here, that's a difficult thing. The properties, it's hard to find the same properties in clay here. But they will sand their pot first with 100 grit, then 220, 320, and sometimes up to, you know, 500, 600, you know, but those are really fine pots. The more they sand, the more expensive a pot will get.
Gerardo's using the tea saucer. Is he thinning or smoothing?
Smoothing mostly.
Shaping?
Mostly smoothing.
Okay.
Forma con este su plato más que no es para hacer la olla más suave. Yeah, it's smoothing mostly. So my Spanish is. He's being nice and not looking at me going, oh man, I gotta send you back to kindergarten when you go back to Mexico. So his coils are just squeezed out by hand. You don't very rarely, see somebody rolling them. Yeah, but I don't know. Once you get used to it, I have an extruder. I mean, I do a lot of coiling, and I had an extruder, and now I never use my extruder. I mean, it's so easy just to squeeze them out. So this one, if you can see, he overlaps it. So Gerardo's been making pots and painting pots for 25 years, which is more than half of his life. And his youngest son is going to be 7 soon, but he's been making pots now. I mean, he started making them about a year ago. He paints pots, but he's very intrigued by clay and stands and watches his dad paint all the time. He's really, he's got a lot of energy, but when he watches his dad paint, he just is very calm. Now, as he starts to come in on the pot, what he does is he actually pinches and sort of pushes together. I mean, an exaggerated move would be like this. He is actually squeezing the clay together as he pinches. And in case you guys want to travel to Mexico, Mata Ortiz is not like you hear on the news, It's a very tranquil town. I've been going there for years. My friends and my family freak me out about going every time before I'm ready to leave, and then I'm in a panic calling up Gerardo or all my friends down there and saying, well, what's it like? And they said, are you gonna buy drugs? And it's like, no. It's like, well, are you gonna go, like at the nightclubs? No, And then they go, well, it's the same as it's always been. It's fine. Nothing's. And I mean, there definitely is a drug war going on down there, but there are drugs here, and honestly, the news is worse here than it is anywhere around where I've been in Mexico.
You drive there? Drive?
I drive. Yeah, I drive.
You drive there?
Yeah. take my car. You know, you do have to get Mexican insurance before you cross the border, and you have to buy a tag that they put in your window that's good for 6 months for you to be there, because they want to make sure if you bring your car in that either if you're going to sell it, you know, that they're getting money from it, or that you're taking it out within that period of time.
Which side of the blade is he using? I can't tell.
He is using the rough side of the blade. So he's going to use the rough side of the blade over the whole pot, and he is he's just moving it up and down the pot, you know, from bottom to top. And what he's doing is he's smoothing it by using the rough side of the blade. If you had pinched and there was like an indentation in it, you would see, because it wouldn't have the serrated texture in it, and you'd be able to fill in that spot. So he's gonna go over the whole pot with the rough side of the blade first, and then he will turn it over when he's getting ready to finish the pot and smooth it with the opposite side of the blade. Yeah, they all make it really easy. And even though his pot edge is really even, you know, when he brings it up, you know, he usually will cut it before he adds another coil.
Do you need to cut it, or
No,
it's just his style?
no, yeah.
Okay. Maybe it makes it.
Keeps it even.
Yeah.
Their clay, I will add, when it dries, is like concrete. I mean, ours is very fragile, you know, and if you push too hard on it, you could easily break a pot. Their clay is really hard. If you don't smooth it fairly well before it dries, and then you go to sand it off, you're gonna spend more time sanding. It's very hard. Pretty rough, yeah. But if I mean, his pot's pretty smooth now. But if you have divots in it, and you know that you're trying to sand it smooth, you're gonna wish you had gotten it a little smoother. So this is their white clay, but they have red, brown, purple, pink, yellow, orange. I don't know, and they can mix any of them together to make any other shade of color that they want. The paints that they use are also found naturally there. They use red iron oxide for their red paint, and they use manganese dioxide for their black paint. But naturally there, it has a clay body already in it, so they don't have to mix it a lot with clay in order to get it to stick. You know, if you went and bought it from your local ceramic store, you'd have to mix a clay body in with it in order to make it work. So if you guys do decide to do that, the trick is that you mix some clay in with it and paint with it and let the paint dry. And if you can rub it off with your finger, then you need to add more clay until you can't wipe it off. If you just mix red iron oxide or manganese with water, as soon as it dries, it'll be powder again. So they typically don't use slips, you know, over their pots like a lot of the like Indian pots, or you know, they use slips a lot more. Mainly they make their pots and sand and burnish them, and then paint them. And the paint is sort of like a slip because it does have a natural clay body in it.
You said 600 pots? How many people live in Mata Ortiz Pueblo?
About 2,500 maybe.
Oh, okay. Like 25%, quarter
Yeah,
population?
yeah, and there's a lot of kids. So.
But how many pots do they make a year?
¿Cuántos ollas?
Hello?
I don't know. Well, he brought 20, I don't know, between 25 and 30 pots up here, and only had 2 shows before he got to my house, and he had 3 when he got to my house. So, and he's made 1 or 2 more that we fired at other workshops, and those sold before we left. So, you know.
Well, how many, like a week? How many would you make in a week?
I don't know, 1 or 2. You know, he 1 or 2. He. You know, I think it's, you know.
Quality instead of quantity. How about that?
Oh, definitely for Gerardo, yeah. You know, some people make a lot, you know, make a lot of pots, and you know, but they're not doing real fine line painting like he does. The painting that he does, he has a brush. I was telling everybody it had 5 hairs, and I counted the hairs on it the other day, and it had 7. I go, oh, it had 7. He goes, you're the one that said it had 5, you know? So, but he has a brush that's made of his daughter's hair that has, you know, 7 hairs on it, and, you know, it's about this long, and he will lay that brush down and paint a line, and then he paints over that line, and then when he starts making lines, he overlaps them, so you know he'll go like that, and you know, so he lays down a lot of lines. Well, also he lays lines so close together that honestly, if I didn't have my glasses on, it looks like a solid painting to me. You know, I can't see between the lines because they're pretty fine. But you know, that's what he loves to paint. And he's very good. See, some people that love to paint only paint. You know, he likes to make pots. He likes to paint pots. I think if you had your choice, would you paint only, or do you like doing both? Well, I think still when you're making a pot, you can shape it. Yeah, I mean, you want to shape it obviously before you can't get your hand inside. You know, you want to get it pushed out. But they, you know, a lot of times if you push out too soon, then the clay wants to lay down, and then you end up, it ends up sort of falling over that edge and giving you your muffin top, you know? So you just want to make sure that you don't push out too soon. But typically on the pots, you know, the wide point, I'm gonna say is about 1 or 2 inches up from the bottom. You know, it's gonna come out slightly and then go back in.
But there's not a, you know, you could use the saucer.
Yeah, and push out. Yeah,
Okay,
push
so
out.
it does happen.
Yeah.
Could you ask him from that particular saucer size, how far out he can go if he were to push it out later?
Como grande uno es?
No, wide.
Ancho también. Oh.
Whoa.
So, yeah. The mold basically, I mean, when you guys, if you get used to using the mold, the difficulty for me about using the mold was I was used to making pots and seeing the whole pot. You know, I'm a hand builder, but being able to see the whole thing made the difference for me. It's very hard to get used to not seeing part of the pot.
Right.
But once you get used to it, it's amazing with that little bit of support that the mold gives you. It's amazing how easy it is to bring a pot up quickly, you know. I mean, even if you're throwing, you know, if you push out a bowl too far and don't have all that clay at the bottom, you know, to support it, gravity will tend to want to pull it down. But the support from the mold will really allow you to bring a pot up very quickly, especially if you don't go out too quickly with it, because then gravity is. ¿Usas este molde por sus ollas grandes? I just asked him if he used this mold for his really big pots, because he has pots that are, you know, like this big that'll take him like 3 months to paint.
Mm-hmm. What did he say?
What did he say?
No, he said he used a little bit a different one.
Right, yeah.
They make the pot in one day, and then they'll let it dry until it's bone dry.
Oh,
you know, it'll be really dry, and then they sand it and burnish it, and then they'll paint it. And the painting will take days.
Yeah, that's what I was like, wow.
And he told me, you know, that in Mata Ortiz they used to burnish when it was leather hard. Somebody made a bunch of pots and they had them covered, so that they could come back and burnish later. They went to the rodeo, and the winds came up and it blew the plastic or something off their pots, and all their pots dried, and they didn't want to lose them. And so that's when they decided, well, let's see if we can sand it. Now, I don't know if that's true. That's Brenda, I don't know. He doesn't know.
It's a legend.
Yeah, it's a legend. That's a good story anyway. But, so they did used to burnish when the clay was wet. The thing that allows them to burnish with the clay being dry is the property of the clay. Because the clay is so fine that will allow you to sand it. I have found very few clays here that have the property of their clay. You might be able to find a clay that sands well, and then it won't take the rapid firing that they do, or that it sands well, but they put oil and water on it to burnish, and it'll take the oil, but once you put the water on, the clay starts popping off, So their clay does have properties that allow them to do the process the way they do. Nobody has a wheel. Very few have kilns, a very few. Mostly they fire with cow dung or wood. We usually will fire one pot at a time. They don't all do that, but in general what they will do is that they will warm up an area on the ground. They put their pots on top of, sometimes they have like a little metal ring, or they'll pound 3 nails in the ground and the pot will sit on top of the nails. And then they put, this is just a clay terracotta pot that they'll put upside down over it. If they do a lot of pots at a time, they might have about a half of a steel drum that they turn upside down over it. If it's going to be a polychrome firing, which is basically an oxygenation firing, so the colors will stay the same, they will put it up on 3 bricks or on 3 rocks, or somehow raise it so that when they put this upside down on top of it, it'll have something to give air supply underneath it. If they're doing a black firing, it will be put directly on the ground and then sealed. So that's the only difference between, a firing where they go black or where they are natural colored.
I'm not getting it. Where's the fuel?
And then,
It's inside or outside?
no,
Outside.
then the whole outside will be
Okay.
either surrounded with cow dung or wood.
And covered also? Or just surrounded, or-
No, just they surround their pot or their drum.
So it's
with-
kind of like a Sanger fire?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and they'll take a little lighter fluid and put it all over it and light their fire. Their firing will last anywhere between a half hour and, probably 45 minutes to an hour. And then they let it cool for about the same length of time, and they'll open it up. So it's a single firing typically with cow dung or wood. I think the cow dung is more even firing, maybe than wood.
Any idea what the temperature is that it gets up to?
About 1,500 degrees.
1,500?
So it's the beautiful burnishing that makes it so shiny versus some of them that are not so shiny.
Right. And when you see his burnishing, I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing the way the shine comes up on this clay,
And it's different when we use our terracage. I mean, we're trying to put a finish on it to make it smooth, and they're just pure terracage.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, the
refined.
clay definitely has really nice properties.
That would make it shine much more than us putting terracage on top of something.
Right. No, he'll get a mirror shine almost on his pots. Recently, Jerardo has started to do what he calls tres negros, which is 3 blacks.
Oh, wow.
And he will start with, red or yellow clay, a clay that's darker in color, and he sands it really fine. And then he will burnish it only in certain areas. So he figures out his design. Now this is the only time I've ever seen them draw on a pot in order to lay out their design. If he was going to paint on a pot and it was going to be totally burnished, he would just start painting. On the Tres Negros, because he's only going to burnish part of it, he'll usually draw his design on there. He'll burnish certain areas. Certain areas will be extremely fine sanded, and then certain areas are painted. And after the firing, after a black firing, it'll look like 3 different textures of black. They're really beautiful.
I would imagine that if they were ever to sell their clay, which they probably don't, if it's so specially refined, I mean, it would be more than porcelain, right? That's
I have bought their clay down there, and actually, we were trying to get some up here for the class, but sometimes when it's legal to bring it across the border, but sometimes when they come, you know, the guards, you know, want to give them a hard time. So he tried to bring some clay and didn't get across the border with it. They made him leave it this time, you know. So that was pretty sad because then he lost all the clay. But I have bought little bricks of clay that probably it would take 3 to make one of our normal bags of clay. And it costs at least $15 to $20 for a little brick. So I mean, the first time I bought it, I mean, you know, we think of our prices and you know, and things in general aren't that expensive there.
Yeah.
And it's like, geez, I can buy like 10 pots for this. You know what do you mean? I mean, but
special.
yeah, I mean, one of my friends wanted me to bring it back 200 pounds, and I'm just looking at it. I said, I don't even know that there's 200 pounds in the Pueblo at one time. You know, I mean, you know, they don't.
Yeah.
They're very sparing with their clay, you know, because I mean, if you have to make it, you know, and even though there's a lot of clay there, and you can go almost anywhere and collect the clay, you know, it's still time consuming. It's not so much difficult as it just takes time. You have to wait for it to dry out.
Oh yeah.
You know. The backbreaking work is like digging it. You know, I mean, if it's hard, they're using a pickaxe, and it's not easy work to do that. Afterward, you know, processing it really isn't that laborsome.
But how much would it take to, you know, sift it 3 times and dry it and all this stuff?
Yeah, but it's really saturated in water. I mean, it's like you're scooping a can of coffee, and it's like you're getting water and you're pouring it through.
Okay.
You know, it's really not that hard, you know. No, if you were going to get to Mata Ortiz, the best way for me to describe where it is in Mexico is if you actually went straight, if you found the border between New Mexico and Arizona, okay, and then got to the U.S. border into Mexico and went almost straight down from that. Okay, so it's northern central Mexico.
Is that close to Chihuahua?
It is in the state of Chihuahua, but it's very close to the Sonora border, which is on the west side of Chihuahua. It's northwestern Chihuahua.
How long does it take you? You drive down from here?
I do. From my house in Healdsburg, which is north of Santa Rosa, it's about a 21-hour drive. And Tucson is the nearest airport if you wanted to fly in. I mean, that's, you know, there's not a closer airport in Mexico.
But you fly to where?
Fly to Tucson, and then there are vans. There are a lot of buses. You can take a bus from Tucson into Mata Ortiz, or there are a lot of people that live. They call them traders. They're people who buy and sell pottery from Mata Ortiz. There are many of them that live in Tucson, and you know, would take you down $65 to get a bus.
From Tucson?
¿Un dirección? Okay, $65 one way to get a bus from Tucson to Mata Ortiz.
And then where do you live at? Do they have hotels?
There are there's like an inn there, and there is a little hotel. But what I would recommend, you know, if you guys ever want information about getting down there or whatever, you can email. But Marta, one of the people who lives in Mata Ortiz, has a wonderful little place. She is the best cook in the pueblo, and she has like she rents rooms, and you know they have common bathrooms, but it's like a three-sided, you know, enclosed area. If you drive your car, she'll even let you bring your car into the, you know, patio area at night. But she has rooms that have common bathrooms, and she'll make as many meals a day or not, you know, so she can add that on to the cost if you want to get fed or not, because there aren't really restaurants in Mata Ortiz. There's pretty much pottery and more pottery, you know. He'll let it stiffen up so that it's more firm, and he'll turn it upside down, and on that edge there might be like a little divot or something, and he will scruff up the whole bottom and smooth up that edge, add more clay if he has to, take clay off if he has to, and he'll rough up the whole bottom and then smooth out the bottom again, even if it doesn't need anything, because the molds are usually pretty smooth. He still will rough it up and smooth it out again. And then he will put a little dent in it, you know, he'll set it down to put a little dent in it so that it lays a little flat, you know, so he doesn't have to sand it flat. No. He went to an exhibition recently with his friend, or one of the guys from Mata Ortiz. And I guess he said that the guy would be standing there in his mind. And he was like, oh wow, I really like that. And he says, you like it, you buy it. So now every time I go, oh, I like that, he goes, oh, you like it, you buy it. He's finishing off the bottom of his pot. So what he's done is he's taken it out of the mold. It's firm enough that he can set it upside down. And basically, he's just gonna do the same thing that you already did to the top, but he's trying to shape up that edge. So if he has a little bit of an overhang of some kind, he's trying to smooth it to make it look like it flows with the top. You know, you might find, like, he's scraping off some clay, you might find you might have to fill in also, and you just need to take a little clay to fill in. You're not trying to scrape the whole and smooth the whole pot. At this point, you're only gonna work on the whole bottom, and you are gonna rough the whole thing up and then smooth it out. But you're sort of doing that just on the bottom and up a little bit to try to make that edge be smooth.
So this is to get rid of the muffin top.
Right, right. He's made this pot. It's been sanded, and again, the sanding is done first with 100 grit, 80 or 100. You know, it's not specific. Then 220, then 320. You can go as fine as you want, but at a certain point, you don't get any smoother. He is slathering baby oil on it. Okay, you can use baby oil or you can use vegetable oil.
So it's not dry.
Yes. No. Olive, yeah, you can use olive oil. You know, somebody asked mineral oil. I think mineral oil is a little too thick, but pretty much any oil you can use. So, you know, he rubs it really well with some kind of oil, and then he's going to wait for it to dry. You can also, sometimes you have little lines that you just can't get out, and if you leave a little of the clay dust on it, you can, when you're putting the oil on, you can push it into the lines, okay? So, you know, don't get too clean about taking all the dust off. Sometimes it's good, you know, just to get a little of the dust and be able to push it into a crevice. But he's gonna wait now for, until you can see that the oil has soaked in. And once it soaks in, I take a little piece either of like t-shirt material, cotton, or this is a little piece of chamois. And it'll be wetted down, but not, and squeezed out so that it's not dripping with water. And he'll take it and he'll rub just a little bit of the pot and burnish it with a polished stone, and then he'll rub a little bit more, you know, wipe it. When you wipe, you do want to have some pressure on it to actually push in, so that if you do have little holes or something, the water will actually move some of the clay and push it into the holes, okay? So you want to use a little pressure, but you want to try to wipe in one direction.
I'm sorry, you add water?
Yes, he's going to soak his chamois down. He's got a chamois over there, and he's going to soak it with water, but you don't want the water to be dripping. If you wring it out like this with your hands, you want to make sure that you don't have water still dripping off your hands, because if it goes onto the pot, their clay, even our clay, it'll sort of start eating a little bit of a hole, and it adds so much moisture that then if you use your rock to burnish it, it's going to pick the clay up. So you don't want the clay being really wet. You know, he's letting the oil dry into it, and it's a combination of the oil and the water that's going to let the stone glide on top to burn it. Maybe you guys could practice with your brushes a little bit.
Oh, he was wiping.
So he's just wiping with the chamois, and you can see he's wiping in you know, mean, he tries to push in a little bit, but you don't want the clay to get really wet doing this.
So the function of the oil is to kind of
Is to repel the water, and it's a combination of the oil and the water that are actually gonna allow the stone to glide over it. Now, now that's a stone that he uses. It's an agate. But at first, if you're not sure, if you haven't burnished before, push lightly with the stone until you figure it out. Because if it's too wet, it'll pull the clay off. You can always burnish real lightly, real quickly over the wet area, and then come back and go over it again. You know, you can definitely push harder when it's just right. You know, when the water's dry enough.
What is he using again to burnish it?
It's a polished stone. That one's an agate. Has I got that now? Yeah.
Tumble rock would work too.
Yeah, tumbled rocks, yeah, polished stones. Some stones are harder than others, and I have found that agates or quartz work really well because they're a very hard stone.
What happens when a stone doesn't work well? What do you mean?
I had to bring it up, didn't I? You won't get as much of a shine, and you know you want a stone that doesn't have imperfections in it, because if you have like a little nick or something, then you're going to scratch the pot with it. So whatever part of the stone you're using to burnish needs to be smooth.
How often does he go over the same area?
At most he usually goes over it twice. So he'll do like a lighter burnish at the beginning, you know, just to make sure that the water's not, you know, it's not too wet, and then
You're pressing harder in.
yeah.
The burnishing is it always in the
Tumble
same
rock.
direction?
It's a smooth rock.
It doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to be, no.
Okay.
And lines that you see on it now, when it dries, you probably won't see. Sometimes at the top of the pot, he'll burnish up and down, and then on the bottom, just because of the way you have to hold it, sometimes it's easier to burnish in the other direction. So it doesn't have to be in the same direction, and you may see lines, but you know, if you let your pot dry for 24 hours, you won't see the lines most of the time. And definitely after firing. The only time you see a real line after you're firing is if you miss a spot.
So does it matter if the rock is flat or round? Is it
You know,
better if it's rounded?
they use flatter stones.
Flatter stones.
But not on the flat side. 'Cause
It's sort of flat, you know, they're flat, but they're rounded on the edge, you know, so they're not sharp edged. I will say flat stones work better on their clay. You know, when I burnish, I use round stones more. But I do like the flat stones better on their clay. Yeah, you don't want a lot of water in your chamois or in your cloth, you know, because if you get too much water, you can,
not wet.
yeah, it's not. But he wets it down between every time he uses it or every other time, you know, he'll re-wet it, but it doesn't have a lot of water in it. And you definitely, when you squeeze it out, you want to make sure you don't have drip still on your fingers. Yeah, so he's saying, you know, he would let it dry for 2 or 3 hours before he would paint that. 3 black pot. So he sanded the whole thing really fine paper, okay? Took a long time to sand. So he went from 100 to 200 to 300 to 400 on this at least. Then he actually did draw an outline of where he wanted to burnish, because now he actually burnished just part of the pot, which is a lot harder because you actually have to follow a line or make a design out of the burnished area. And now he's going to start painting it. And so he'll paint it, and then when it fires, it's going to be a really flat, the sanded part is gonna look like a velvet black. The painted part is gonna be flat black. So where you see the white right now is gonna be flat black.
Is the white just bare, what is the white? Bare clay? What is
The white is their paint, which is made
Oh,
out of their
painted.
white clay.
Okay.
What paint, huh?
So as he paints, he's gonna dip the brush, lay down a line, then you'll see him actually come back, go over the line, and overlap to get to the next one.
What's he painting with?
He's painting with white clay. So it's sort of like a clay slip.
So he has to go over each stroke a couple of times.
Yeah, and you guys, you're gonna make brushes. I would highly recommend you don't make a 7 count.
You think 14?
Fine.
I couldn't do that, so it shakes too much.
Yeah.
I couldn't work with everybody looking at him.
Yeah.
Even with my glasses, I don't think I can see
that.
But that's how you would get a straight line. Huh? So it puts kind of a groove in, huh?
But if you guys don't want to make them, I would just recommend using Yeah, it's pretty much. Can you see? Yeah, this is the outside. Amazing. Like the red clay.
So if you make a mistake, can you wipe it off?
One of this basically is covered. So that's basically.
Is that a 7 hair brush?
Yeah, that's.
How many does he use up to? Brush? I mean, like 15 or 30 or no? Is it usually always a 7? For
Yeah, I mean, those are all his brushes that he uses right there.
where?
You know,
Oh,
he
okay.
has a couple fine line brushes, but I think they have 7 or 8 hairs now.
Is that what you mean by seven hair brush?
7 hair.
Yeah, there's
7 pieces of his daughter hair.
Oh my God.
So there is no way to make a correction on this, you just have to paint a different design?
Actually, people asked him that at the last workshop, and had
What was the question?
to make a correction. Si pones una línea en una locación que no le gusta, ¿qué haces?
Cambió el diseño.
He changed the design. I just throw it away and start.
Don't care.
Is there ever a problem with the white clay chipping off?
If you get your paint too thick, yes, it'll pop off. You know, so you can see how thin their clay is. Their clay is very watery, and that's also a reason why they have to go over it a couple times.
Does it breathe?
But if you get it too
Yeah, really.
thick,
I'm
you
holding
can
my
sort of
breath.
see it when you get to
Are you breathing,
see it if
Gerardo?
It dries too thick. It'll crack just like clay when it dries.
That's relaxing. So the brush length is very long. The hairs are really long. I would think they'd be hard to control.
It's actually easier to make a fluid line with a long hair brush than it is with wood.
So then it doesn't.
Yeah, because we all decided, you know, in my first class, we all decided that the teacher was crazy and we weren't going to do with long hair brushes. So we all started using our little brushes, you know, our short
Don't bump
hair
the table.
brushes to try to make lines. I found out very quickly that he was
That would be
correct.
funny,
Wrong. Yeah, it's almost like a pinstriping brush, you know, like they used to do cars with, you know, to pinstripe cars. Yeah. On the wine line, what he probably did was draw an outer line and an inner line. And then if you look at, he has some brushes that have short hair, and they also have more hairs. So that's his filler brush. And you would make, you make these brushes all the same way. But the filler brush he would use to fill in the spaces between fine lines.
So to me, it's like, how do you measure? How do you figure out that, so your design, because a lot of them are very geometric.
Right.
How do you make sure, like, you get to the end and it's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
you know?
On a lot of them, they what they actually will do is almost divide the pot in half. And so they might put 2 lines down this way. And then they divide that in half. And then they divide that in half and that in half. And so then they know they have an even number of spaces, So that would be one way. Many of the pots, if you look at them, imagine a piece of graph paper.
Right.
Okay, they put a bunch of vertical lines, then they put a bunch of horizontal lines, and then they start filling it in and making designs like if you took a piece of graph paper, or if you're a weaver, you can make designs by using graph paper, and that's pretty much what they do on their pots. So if there is an overlap of color, they'll use the dominant color to go back over it.
And the bark is made of like graphite or
Manganese dioxide and clay. See, I don't think they mix a lot of their paints. I think a lot of them have natural clay body, in the oxides. Ours, you buy them at a ceramic store, they're purified, and so then you have to add the clay to them. So, I would just pick a clay that's closest to the clay body that you're using, and if you want to make a dark paint, it's better to start with dark clay to begin with. So if you're making a red paint, start with red clay, and then add the oxide.
And what you might want to do is
Yeah, so that's really fine. Yeah, try it out. Yeah, because their clay is all collected in the same area, I don't think that they have fit problems like we do, because we use a lot of different clay types.
The thick design that he has already, how did he make it? Did he use different type of brush or something before he?
Put a thin line on the outer of both sides, and then he filled it in with this brush.
As it dries, it kind of shows up like magic.
Yeah, because it goes on sort of gray.
Yeah.
And then it
And
dries
all of a sudden
white.
it's like,
Yeah.
where did that line come from?
But he's going over it twice, right?
He goes
Yeah.
over every line twice. I think.
Yeah.
It's very fun. No, I don't think I'll ever master that skill. For making candy caramel apples. Okay, so they have a point on them. And human hair. I'm taking way more than he has, but I'm happy for you guys to have whatever you want. I'm just going to sort of try to pass out the hair, because otherwise it gets all bunched up, and then it's harder for me to use it for other classes. So what you're going to do is you're going to put the hair on here, and it's a lot easier. If you don't want to, dip it in your water, okay? So it's okay if you don't want to lick it. But all we're going to do is take a piece of thread gonna wind it around there. And at the end, we're gonna tie a couple knots. And after that, you're gonna use some fingernail polish. Cover it with fingernail polish. You can also cover it with, oh, actually, another thing to use, this is just any old thread. Some person came up and said, oh, it's 50% polyester and 50% cotton. No, it's whatever I pulled out of my drawer. Another thing that works really well is waxed linen or waxed cord, because as you wind it, it sort of sticks to itself, and then you don't maybe have to use the fingernail polish. You want to get it wound fairly close to the tip, but not too close, or the threads might pull off in the hair direction.
Put it on the pointy end?
I started it up on the, yes, I put the hair on the pointy end. And then I started winding up further. I'm winding down to the point, and then I'm going to wind back toward the end. And so you just want to try to keep it tight. It doesn't matter if the hair shows through part of it. In fact, see, I've already wound too close to the tip, and it's sliding off. So you don't want to get it too close to the tip, because if you do, it actually goes off the end. Now I'm in trouble.
It goes what?
It'll go off the
Because
end.
it's skewered, I mean, it's.
Yeah, the pointy end.
It's tapered, and if you get too close to the tip, this is what happens. So, but you want to get close enough to the tip that you're keeping the hairs pointed, because if you're too far up, then it wants to separate more.
So you want the hairs to be about that long?
We're going to cut the hair afterward. So you want to make sure the hair is longer than what you're going to want it. And then we're going to cut it off.
How long is it? Does he have varying lengths?
It's about, I'm going to say 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. This one's a little bit longer. What you want to do is, if the hair curls, you want it to be below the curl. So you do, but you do want to, in general, use straighter hair. Okay, so. Okay, and then basically I just run it around and make a little loop. So tie 1 or 2 knots. And then just leave it long, and then cover it with fingernail polish, okay? After the fingernail polish dries, then if you want, you can put another coat on. I think we're getting a little on the fingernail polish, so you might have to have somebody hold the bottle sideways for you. But make sure that where you tied the knot, for sure that you get a good layer of fingernail polish there, so the knot doesn't come undone. And then try to also make sure you get a lot of fingernail polish right at the end, so those threads don't come off toward the hair. Okay, so after it dries, we can go ahead and cut the threads off, and then we're going to cut the tip, and the tip is cut slightly at an angle. Okay, no definite angle, maybe 45 degrees. Okay, so that there are part of the hairs that are going to lay down first before the others lay down. So that's what we're looking for, is just a brush. It doesn't matter how long the hair is now, you're going to actually cut the hair off later. Okay, so you want to keep the hair long on this side right now, so that you can cut it afterwards.
You're looking at about an inch eventually.
Yeah, you're looking at about this long, at least, somewhere in this range.
What kind of hair do you use?
This is human hair.
So any thickness or any?
They use their children's hair, and my hair is too fine, so it's not just, when you say children's hair, we're not really talking about baby fine hair. Their children's hair, I'm going to say, like elementary school age, is coarser than mine ever was or still is. So, but it's finer than the adult hair. The adult hair is far more coarse. So you're looking definitely for straight hair rather than curly hair. And they say they do not use artificially colored hair. So, and that's another reason why they use children's hair.
So what's the I mean, I understand the problem with curly, but when it's fine hair, what goes wrong?
Oh, what goes wrong is that when you dip into the paint, it goes limp and
It just hangs.
it hangs. So it won't stay. So you need hair that's thick enough that when you dip it in the paint, it still stays straight enough that it's not going like that, because then you have to sort of, whip it onto your pot, you just don't have any control on it. My hair was far too fine.
So
and it
can you
just-
dip that in water so we can see, or is it too?
Yeah,
How about
it's-
horsehair?
It's not, horsehair is too stiff and it doesn't give them, so this one's too long, but, if I cut that length, it would still stand out, See, I mean, it's still standing out even at this long length, but you don't want that long. You're gonna cut it about there,
Okay, good.
And the length usually leave it a little bit longer at first, and then if you feel like you just can't work with it, then cut it shorter. Okay, I mean, you want a longer brush, but it's better not to cut it too short right at the beginning. Not that they're all that hard to make.
Yeah. Like put the pots there,
Then build the fire on top.
Sure.
And how all the way on top or just around the side? All the way?
There.
Okay, but then it has whole air going through inside.
Yeah.
So that's for the polychrome.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you put the salt dust inside?
For the black ones,
Oh, no
this is
air
for the
from
black?
and tap and feel,
Suffocated. And then you put.
But there's stuff
put dirt.
inside. But there's stuff inside.
You don't get smoke in there.
What?
You don't get smoke in there. It's burning out the oxygen inside,
So what makes it
and that's
black?
what creates the black.
But you put,
You have to have some kind of, right?
No,
You
she
can
said
put
something
sawdust, but
about
I'll tell
smoke.
you, it doesn't,
It's not gonna matter.
I've done it with, or we've done it because I saw it without anything inside, and somebody was arguing with us at a workshop, and so we said, okay, we'll fire your pot then, and put sawdust in one, and don't put sawdust in another one, and we did them, and they both looked the same.
that's fascinating.
Now, you can put, I will say that hardwood sawdust will make a blacker black, by putting, but they just put a little, like a handful.
Well, it must be that enough carbon gets in there. Look at that.
It really doesn't make a difference whether there's sawdust in there or not. What makes a difference is that you really do need to seal it, like push dirt or sand, or even if you've already done a firing, push the ashes up around the pot.
Well, don't you think some carbon has to get in there, whether it's from the sawdust or from the smoke
I
around
think there's
it?
enough organic material in clay that's what we figured
Carbonate.
out, that you
Okay.
didn't have to have something burning up inside. It was it not having oxygen that did more.
But then, okay, so the problem is, what happens if you bisque first? Why isn't all that, what you say, the organic material burnt away? I mean, so that makes sense for a single firing, what you're saying. I mean, conceivably.
Do you bisque first?
But if you
No,
bisque first.
these are single fire.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you bisque first.
If you bisque first,
You
then you
probably
probably have to add
some
sawdust.
combustion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay.
And always one at a time, or you can do?
No, you can do multiples at a time, and the way that they would do that is they just pound 3 nails into the ground. So for every 3 nails, they put 1 pot, set 1 pot on 3 nails, another pot on another 3 nails, and then they would put like a half of a steel drum, maybe that's that tall, but that big around.
Okay.
And still, it's raised up if they want it to stay the colors of the clay and of the paint. And if they want it to turn black, then they would seal it to the ground.